The wind was cruel that night, not just in its bite but in the way it screamed through the trees, as if nature itself had something to mourn. Snowflakes fell heavy, sticking to every surface, and the mountains loomed like silent witnesses to the tragedy unfolding beneath their watchful peaks. Clara stumbled forward, her boots barely lifting from the ground. The snow clung to the hem of her skirt and froze around her ankles, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not with a child inside her. Not when she'd made it this far. Her hands trembled inside threadbare gloves, and the scarf wrapped around her face had long since frozen stiff. Breathing was an effort, every exhale turning to ice in the air. She leaned on a walking stick she'd fashioned from a broken branch, but even that shook in her grip. Her eyes, once bright with dreams and fire, now only held exhaustion and a flicker of instinct, the kind that comes when you're all out of plans but not yet ready to die. She hadn't seen a living soul in over a day. No one answered her cries as she wandered the snowy backroads of Wyoming's high country. The last house she'd approached had turned her away with a muttered, "Ain't no charity here," and a door slammed before she could beg again. That had been yesterday. Or was it the day before? Time had started to slip sideways. The child within her kicked, a faint flutter beneath layers of wool and skin. It was a small mercy. Proof that something inside her still fought. She whispered through cracked lips, "Hang on, baby. Mama's not quittin'." Clara Monroe was not always this woman, lost, frozen, and clinging to hope in a howling wilderness. Just a year ago she'd been a wife. A partner. The kind of woman who smiled when her husband brought her flowers plucked from the riverbank. John Monroe had been a gentleman. He spoke with his hands more than his mouth, always carving, fixing, building something. He built their cabin with his own 2 hands on land they leased, and he built her heart from pieces she'd long forgotten how to trust. Then the accident came. One moment, he was chopping logs by the ravine. The next, he was gone, slipped, cracked his head on stone. The silence afterward was worse than the scream that preceded it. She found him the next morning, arms curled as if to cradle firewood, eyes open but unseeing. They buried him with pine branches and prayers. And the town moved on. She didn't blame them. Poor folk have their own burdens. But the kindness she once knew dried up like water in drought. John's debts fell to her. The landowner demanded payment. She sold her wedding ring, her cow, even the embroidered quilt from her mother. Everything she had, gone, piece by piece, until all that remained was the child in her belly and a name no longer whispered with kindness. She had heard stories about an aunt near Elk Hollow. Her mother's sister, estranged for reasons lost in time. But it was hope, and hope is sometimes all you can afford to carry. Now, as her feet dragged through drifts of snow past her knees, the horizon blurred, and the darkness thickened. The wind howled, but her ears were too numb to register it fully. Somewhere in the distance, wolves cried into the sky. Not close yet, but close enough. She collapsed once, her knees folding beneath her. She managed to crawl to the base of a tree, its bark rough against her cheek. She rested there for a moment, clutching her belly. The cold was in her bones now, not just her skin. She could feel it in her lungs, each breath like shards of glass. Tears came, but they froze before they could fall. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to the baby, John, or God. Maybe all three. "I tried." She closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just to rest. She imagined warmth. The wood stove back in the cabin, the scent of pine and roasted potatoes. John humming low as he whittled by the fire. If she focused hard enough, she could almost hear him now. Then came the crunch. Soft, deliberate. Snow beneath boots. Clara's eyes shot open. Her heart seized. She tried to move, but her limbs refused. Fear mingled with confusion as a shadow moved between trees, tall, broad-shouldered, mounted on a dark horse. The figure stopped a dozen paces from her. For a moment no one moved. Then the rider dismounted. Snow muffled everything but the sound of his steps. He knelt beside her. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but she saw the glint of his eyes, sharp, alert, unreadable. He didn't speak. Not a single word. Clara tried to back away, but only whimpered. Her voice was hoarse, broken. "Please!" The stranger reached behind his saddle and pulled off his long coat. Without ceremony, he wrapped it around her, gently tucking it beneath her arms. The wool was warm, smelling faintly of smoke and leather. He then lifted her effortlessly, as though she weighed nothing at all, and carried her to his horse. She wanted to protest, to ask who he was, where he was taking her. But the words stuck in her throat. Her head fell against his chest, and for the first time in days, she let her eyes close not from defeat, but from surrender. The rhythm of the horse's steps and the man's heartbeat beneath her ear lulled her into something like sleep. The cold still bit, but it was dulled, softened by the stranger's warmth. She dreamed, not of John this time, but of a nameless man in a snowstorm, silent and strong, like the ghost of mercy itself. When she awoke, it was to firelight dancing across a wooden ceiling. Her cheeks burned as sensation returned. She was lying on a bed covered in thick quilt. The cabin around her was small, rustic, and silent save for the crackle of logs in the hearth. Her boots had been removed. A basin of water sat nearby, steam curling from its surface. Her walking stick leaned against the wall. She sat up slowly, head spinning. The coat, his coat, was draped over her like a second skin. He was there, across the room, seated on a stool, tending to the fire. He didn't look up when she stirred. His hands moved with quiet precision, feeding logs into the flame. "Who are you?" she asked, voice raspy. Still, he said nothing. Just nodded once. Then he stood, turned, and retrieved a bowl from the stove. He crossed the room and held it out. Soup. Steam wafted up, rich with the scent of herbs and root vegetables. She stared at him, unsure. His face was lined, tanned, unreadable. A beard masked most of his jaw. His eyes held a softness that contrasted his rugged frame, but they also held sorrow. The kind of sorrow one doesn't speak of. She took the bowl, hands trembling. "Thank you." No reply. Just a tilt of his head, then he returned to his stool. She sipped the soup slowly, each swallow a miracle. Outside, the storm still howled. But inside the cabin, something shifted, just a little. A fire against the dark. A man with no words. And a woman too weary to question a kindness she didn't yet understand. As the wind battered the walls and snow buried the world outside, Clara Monroe realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. And that realization, quiet as it was, carried more warmth than the fire. The fire had dimmed to glowing embers by morning, casting faint orange shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the cabin. Clara awoke with a start, clutching the coat still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. For a brief second she didn't remember where she was, only that she was warm, her belly was still, and the world outside sounded muffled by snow. She sat up slowly, every muscle aching from the previous day's journey. The silence was thick, but not empty. Somewhere behind the wooden door, she could hear the crunch of snow under boots, deliberate and measured. He was out there. The cowboy. Clara swung her feet over the edge of the bed and winced as they touched the cool floor. Her boots had been placed neatly by the hearth, freshly dried. Next to them sat a small tin cup of water, a gesture of care so quiet it startled her. She picked it up, sipped, and felt her throat unclench for the first time in what felt like weeks. When the door opened, Snow swept in with him, clinging to the folds of his coat. He stepped inside wordlessly, removed his hat, and shook off the frost. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before he turned to hang his coat on a hook by the door. She wanted to speak, anything to acknowledge what he'd done. But the words felt brittle. Instead, she watched him move through the cabin like a man used to silence, like a man who had learned to survive in it. He brought over a plate of dried venison and bread, set it on the small table, and gestured for her to eat. Clara hesitated, then nodded. She rose, stiffly, and took a seat. He sat opposite her, chewing slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire, never her. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked up, blinked once, then returned to his meal. Clara studied him now, unobstructed by cold or fear. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-40s perhaps, but not worn. His features were sharp, carved more by grief than age. There was a gentleness in the way he moved, despite the breadth of his shoulders and the rifle leaning against the door. "Do you live out here alone?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "Why?" This time he paused. He looked at her, really looked. His mouth opened just enough to form a word, but whatever it was, he swallowed it. Instead, he stood and reached for the kettle, poured her a cup of tea, and sat back down. The silence felt heavier than it had the night before, but not hostile. It was thoughtful, hesitant, as if words were things he hadn't trusted in a long time. Clara sipped her tea and let the warmth flow through her. The baby stirred, nudging gently beneath her ribs, and she placed a hand over her belly, protective and instinctive. "I'm Clara," she offered, her voice steadier now. "Clara Monroe." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. He set his mug down, then moved to a shelf above the hearth. From it, he retrieved a small wooden box. Opening it slowly, he withdrew a folded piece of parchment and placed it in front of her. The paper crackled as she opened it, an old news clipping. The headline was faded, but the image was clear. A stagecoach wreck, overturned on a mountain pass. Beneath it, 2 names circled in ink. Clara's breath caught. "Your family." He nodded once. That was all. She looked up, and this time she didn't see a stranger. She saw a man held together by quiet rituals and buried pain. A man who had once loved, once lost, and had since chosen silence as his sanctuary. "How long ago?" she asked gently. He tilted his head toward the fire, fingers laced loosely in front of him. 7 winters, he finally said. The sound of his voice was startling, deep, gravelly, like it had been unused for far too long. Clara wanted to ask more, but the fragility of that moment held her back. He'd given her a piece of himself, and she wouldn't risk shattering it. That night, she sat near the fire after he'd gone out to tend the horse. She let her fingers rest on her belly, humming softly, a tune her mother used to sing when she was a child. It wasn't much, but it helped still her trembling thoughts. She tried not to think about what came next. The road ahead, the aunt she wasn't sure would welcome her, the labor that could arrive any day now. All she knew was that for now, there was warmth, and there was safety, and there was a man who had every reason to turn away, and hadn't. He returned not long after, cheeks reddened by the cold, and went about placing fresh logs on the fire. She watched him, her curiosity slowly outpacing her caution. "You don't say much," she said, not as an accusation but an observation. He didn't look at her. "Words don't fix what's broke." She nodded, letting that truth sit. "Maybe not. But they can help carry it." He didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, just enough to suggest a smile that hadn't found its way fully. Over the next few days, they settled into a rhythm, cautious but consistent. He hunted and chopped wood. She cooked, cleaned, and rested. They shared silence like a familiar blanket, broken only by soft words or quiet gestures. Clara learned his name from a carving above the mantel, W.W. burned into the wood in neat block letters. She asked once if that was him, and he nodded. Wyatt, then. A name that suited the man, solid, weathered, steady. She found herself watching him more often. The way he ran a hand through his hair when thinking. The tenderness with which he fed the horse, spoke to it in low tones no one else heard. The careful way he moved around her, always giving her space, always making sure her needs were met before his own. Still, there were moments that unsettled her. One evening, when the wind had picked up and the sky darkened early, Clara woke from a nap to find the fire low and Wyatt gone. She stepped outside, clutching the coat tighter around her, and scanned the snowy clearing. There, just beyond the fence line, he stood alone, shovel in hand. At his feet, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He knelt, dug, and placed the bundle into the ground. She watched, unmoving, breath caught in her throat. When he returned, she was already inside, seated by the hearth. He said nothing, and she didn't ask. But the next morning, she saw the wooden marker he'd carved, simple, with a name etched deep into the wood: Rosie. Likely the dog. But it could have been anything, anyone. The grief in this cabin didn't speak aloud. It echoed in movements, lingered in corners. Days blurred. Outside, the snow began to lessen. The world hinted at thaw. But something else thawed too, something between them. She caught him watching her once, not with caution, but with quiet consideration. She offered a smile, and this time, he returned it. Then, the tracks appeared. Wyatt noticed them first, half buried in snow, leading from the trees to the cabin's edge. Not his. Not hers. Someone else had come close. He didn't panic. But he was different after that, quieter, if possible. He oiled his rifle, checked the windows, reinforced the door. Clara asked if it was animals. He shook his head. Men, was all he said. That night, as the wind rose again, Wyatt sat near the door, rifle across his knees. Clara couldn't sleep. The baby twisted inside her, sensing her unease. She walked over, sat beside him. "Do you know who it was?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Might be people I once knew. People I left behind." She studied him, heart pounding. "Should we leave?" He met her gaze. "They'll come again. And if they mean you harm, they'll find more than they bargained for." His voice was steel now, not cruel, but resolute. "Ing." The morning after the tracks were found, Wyatt was already gone from the cabin when Clara awoke. The fire had been stoked, coffee brewed, and a bowl of oats left on the table. Her breath misted in the air. It was colder than usual, and something in her chest coiled tight. She knew before she saw the note. It was scrawled on the back of an old ledger page, tucked neatly under the coffee cup, asterisk back by dusk. "Stay inside. Lock the door, asterisk." Clara stared at it, her hands trembling slightly. Something about the crispness of the writing, the finality of the message, unsettled her more than the prints in the snow ever had. Wyatt wasn't a man who ran from trouble, but today he was walking straight toward it. The hours dragged like weighted cloth. She tried to keep busy, cleaning, straightening, folding the same worn blanket again and again. But every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the roof, made her flinch. Outside, the sky dimmed early. Clouds rolled in, thick and low. Snow began to fall again, first in flurries, then heavier, until the world vanished into white. By dusk, Wyatt hadn't returned. Clara paced the floor, the wood groaning under her steps. Her heart beat a panicked rhythm that only intensified with each passing minute. The baby kicked, hard, and she gasped, doubling over for a moment. The pain wasn't contraction, just pressure, but it was a cruel reminder. She couldn't go after him. Not now. Not in this state. She moved to the window and peered through the frost. No movement. No figure emerging from the woods. Just snow and wind and growing darkness. By full nightfall, fear had sunk deep into her bones. She lit the lantern, pulled Wyatt's coat tighter around her, and sat by the fire. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't afraid, but because crying would make it real. She couldn't allow that yet. He had to come back. There was no other option. Then, footstep. Soft, slow, hesitant. Crunching snow. Coming closer. Clara froze, breath caught in her throat. The steps stopped just outside the door. She didn't move, didn't breathe, until 3 deliberate knocks. Not Wyatt's knock. His was quieter, natural. These sounded measured, forced. She reached for the poker from the hearth, her fingers trembling. "Who's there?" she called, voice stronger than she felt. Silence. Then a voice. Male. Gruff. "Cold out here." Got turned around. She didn't answer. Her grip tightened. "Ma'am," the voice continued, "ain't lookin' for trouble. Just need a place to warm up." Still, she said nothing. Her eyes darted to the rifle Wyatt kept by the door. Just out of reach. "I can pay," the man said. "Got coin. Won't stay long." Something in his tone, it was too smooth now, too practiced. She stepped backward toward the rifle. And then she saw it, a shadow moving past the frosted window. He wasn't alone. Panic surged through her chest. She grabbed the rifle, heart pounding in her throat, and pointed it at the door. "If you try to come in, I'll shoot," she said, louder now. Laughter. Faint, cold. "Ain't no need for that, sweetheart." The doorknob turned. She fired once. The crack of the gunshot split the night. Silence fell again, heavy and immediate. Then footsteps, running. Fading. Clara sank to her knees, the rifle slipping from her hands. Her body shook uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she'd almost faced. Her stomach twisted. She didn't know if it was fear or labor or both. Moments later, the door burst open. Wyatt. His face was wind-burned, jaw tight, eyes searching the room. When he saw her on the floor, the rifle on its side, he dropped his own weapon and rushed to her. "Clara," he breathed, kneeling beside her. I didn't let them in," she stammered. "They tried. There were two. I think they ran when I fired." He pulled her close, checked her for injury, then looked to the window. "You did right," he said. "You did good." She clung to his coat, burying her face against his chest. "I was so scared." He held her tight, the warmth of his body anchoring her. "I know," he murmured. "I shouldn't have left you." Only after she'd calmed did she notice the gash on his temple, blood matting the hair just above his brow. "You're hurt," she said. Wyatt waved it off. "Caught me with the butt of a rifle. One of them. Didn't see me comin'. They'll think twice now." He cleaned the wound himself, refusing her help, and then checked the perimeter. She watched him through the window as he moved like a silent sentinel across the snow, reinforcing barriers, resetting traps, tracking prints. He was a man who had lived through siege before, and survived it. That night, sleep came in fragments. Clara dreamt of fire, of the baby's cries echoing through the mountains, of Wyatt standing in a storm with no face, only eyes full of sorrow. She woke breathless, clutching her belly, heart pounding. The next day, Wyatt stayed close. He cooked, mended the broken latch on the door, even carved a new handle for her tea mug when the old one cracked from heat. Clara could feel the change in him, not just protective, but invested. No longer helping a stranger, but guarding something precious. It scared her. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did. As the days passed, they spoke more. Slowly, then more freely. He told her about the horse outside, Sadie, and how she'd once belonged to his daughter. How he couldn't bring himself to ride any other. He told her about his cabin, how he built it with his own hands, board by board after burying the past. She told him about Elijah, her husband, and how sweet he'd been, how they'd planned to leave the city after the baby. How he'd fallen ill just as they were ready to go. How she buried him in the rain and ran because she didn't know where else to go. "I wasn't running to anyone," she said one morning as they sat by the fire. "Just away." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "That's still a kind of direction." She looked at him then, really looked. At the lines by his eyes, the strength in his hands, the ache that hadn't left but now softened. "I'm not sure what happens after this," she admitted. "You don't need to know yet. But I do need to figure it out." He nodded again. "You will. But not tonight." That night the baby came. It started as a dull ache in her back, then a tightening across her stomach that made her grip the edge of the table. Wyatt noticed immediately. He moved with sudden precision, clearing space near the fire, laying down blankets, boiling water. "I've done this once," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. "It didn't go well. But this time, it has to." Clara was too focused on the pain to answer. Her body was no longer her own, just a vessel of force, of waves crashing against the shore with ruthless rhythm. Wyatt stayed at her side, guiding her breathing, cooling her brow, whispering steady encouragements. "Just breathe, Clara. You're strong. You're so strong." Hours passed. The storm raged outside, wind howling against the cabin like the earth itself was urging her onward. Her screams echoed off the rafters, raw and primal. And then, silence. Followed by a cry. A piercing, perfect cry. Wyatt wrapped the child in cloth, tears in his eyes, and placed the tiny girl into Clara's waiting arms. She laughed through her sobs, pressing the baby close, whispering, "You're here. You're safe." Wyatt knelt beside her, hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You did it." Clara looked up at him, eyes shining. "We did." The fire crackled. Outside, the snow began to ease. Clara stood by the window, cradling her daughter against her chest. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine stillness draped in white. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, muffling the world in quiet, save for the occasional groan of shifting ice on the roof or the soft cooing from the infant nestled against her. They had named her Lily, after the first flower Clara remembered seeing with Elijah, blooming wild and defiant through a crack in the city pavement. Wyatt had said it suited her, small but born fighting. She pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead, marveling at her warmth, her weight, the miracle of her breath. The child's fingers curled instinctively around the edge of Clara's blanket, as though she understood already the fragility of the world she'd entered. Wyatt stepped in from the cold, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. He carried 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder, snow still clinging to his coat. His beard had grown fuller over the past weeks, and a smile ghosted across his lips when he saw Clara watching. "No signs of trouble," he said, placing the game on the table. "Tracks are days old. Think they've moved on." She nodded, but the anxiety didn't leave her entirely. Danger wasn't always something you could see. Sometimes it clung to the corners of memory. Wyatt sensed it too. That night, he sat by the fire, whittling a small figure out of pine. Clara rocked Lily nearby, watching the shadows dance along the log walls. "You think it's over?" she asked, her voice low, like she didn't want to disturb the peace the baby had brought. "I think it's never really over," he replied. "But I also think we're not alone anymore." The words settled between them. Neither of them spoke again for a long while. In the days that followed, Clara healed. Slowly. Her body ached, and exhaustion clung to her like frost, but Wyatt's presence never wavered. He fed her when she forgot to eat, held Lily when she needed to sleep, and never once asked for more than she could give. But she saw him looking, sometimes, those quiet glances when he thought she wasn't watching. There was a tenderness there, something unspoken, waiting patiently to bloom. One morning, she found a small rocking chair beside the hearth. The wood was rough but sturdy, the paint still drying. She ran her fingers along its arms, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "You built this?" she asked when Wyatt returned. He gave a small shrug. "Figured you deserved more than a stool. I didn't even ask." "You didn't have to." Clara sat in the chair and rocked gently, Lily asleep in her arms. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace. But that peace was soon disrupted by the sound of hooves on the snow-packed path beyond the tree line. Wyatt was already on his feet, rifle in hand. He moved to the window, tension climbing his spine. Clara joined him, holding Lily close. 2 riders emerged, dark shapes against the pale canvas of snow. Not bandits, not locals. Military. Clara's breath caught. She looked to Wyatt. "They found me. Let's not jump to conclusions." But when the men dismounted and approached, one called out, "Clara Morris?" Her knees nearly gave. The past had caught up. Wyatt stepped forward, his form a barrier between her and the door. "What do you want?" The man, a clean-shaven officer with a federal badge, raised his hands. "We're not here to harm anyone. Miss Morris is reported missing." Her next of kin feared the worst. "We were sent to locate and ensure her safety." Clara's lips parted, heart thundering in her chest. She stepped forward, past Wyatt. "I'm fine," she said. I left on my own. The officer nodded. That's your right. But your husband's brother filed a missing persons report. He's been trying to reach you. She blinked, stunned. David. He says he's worried sick. He didn't know you were pregnant when you left. Wants to help, offered to take you in. Clara looked down at Lily, then at Wyatt. The weight of the world pressed on her shoulders. She'd run so far, tried to disappear. And still, the world had found her. I need time, she said. I'm not going back with you. Not yet. The officer nodded again, slower this time. We'll give you space. But we'll need to follow up eventually. Let someone know you're safe. That's all. As they rode off, Clara stood beside Wyatt in the snow. The wind carried their hoofbeats away, leaving only the stillness. Do you believe them? She asked. I believe you know what's best for you. She looked up at him, emotion flooding her chest. I don't know what that is yet. Then stay until you do. Spring crept slowly into the mountains. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing soil and stone, and the first brave buds peeked from beneath the frost. Clara found herself laughing more, the sound awkward at first but growing stronger with each day. Lily grew, her eyes widening with wonder at the world around her. Wyatt carried her like she was glass, but Clara could see it, how he beamed when she smiled, how her cries summoned him with urgency he never gave himself. One morning, Wyatt brought a small envelope to the table. What's this? She asked. He hesitated. Your name's on it. Postmarked from the city. Came through the trading outpost. She opened it slowly, expecting recrimination, or worse, a demand. But it was a letter. From David. His handwriting was precise, stiff, but the words surprised her. Clara. I don't know what you're going through, but I'm sorry if I ever made it worse. Elijah loved you more than anything in this world, and if you need space, I'll give it to you. But if you ever want to come back, if you want Lily to know her family, we'll be here. She set the letter down and stared at the fire. Her chest ached, not with fear, but with something she hadn't expected. Forgiveness. Wyatt waited quietly. You don't have to decide today. I know. She smiled, a quiet, solemn thing. But it's good to know I'm not hated. No one could hate you, Clara. She turned to him, something shifting in her eyes. What about you? He held her gaze. I never did. That night, as Lily slept between them, Clara reached for Wyatt's hand. He took it without hesitation. The silence was no longer heavy, it was full of meaning, of possibility. In the months that followed, Clara began to write. Not for others, not yet, but for herself. Pages filled with her journey, her fears, the small, radiant victories. She wrote of Elijah, of the city, of the night Lily was born. And slowly, she began to write of Wyatt, not as the man who rescued her, but as the man who stayed. One warm evening, as the last snows melted and green overtook the forest, Wyatt handed Clara a small, wrapped bundle. What's this? She asked. Open it. Inside was a worn silver locket, polished clean. She opened it to find a photo, hers and Lily's, taken on the old cabin step. I had one of Elijah, she whispered. I know. Thought maybe it was time for a new one. Tears blurred her vision. She reached up, kissed his cheek. You gave us a life, she said. And you never asked for anything in return. He met her eyes, voice thick. All I ever wanted was to matter again. You do, she whispered. To both of us. That night, Clara stepped outside and looked up at the stars. Lily slept soundly inside. Wyatt stood beside her, his arm wrapped gently around her shoulders. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had softened. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out.